I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe I parked a little off, maybe someone complained, maybe it was just one of those annoying misunderstandings you deal with and move on. But then I got to the impound lot, paid $380 to get my own truck back, and that's when it hit me. They didn't make a mistake. They thought they could get away with it. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to let it slide, not this time. I've been living on that piece of land for most of my life. 5 acres tucked at the very end of a quiet stretch just outside of town. The kind of place where you can hear the wind move through the trees at night, and not much else. My dad bought it back in the late 80s, long before anyone even thought about building that neat little HOA neighborhood that now sits right up against my back fence. Back then, it was just open land, dirt roads, and a handful of folks who minded their business. And that's how I liked it. When my dad passed, the land came to me. Not just property, but history. I kept everything the same as much as I could. The gravel pad where we used to park our trucks, the old tool shed he built with his own hands, even the worn-out fence line that leaned just a little too far on one side. It wasn't pretty, but it was ours, and that mattered more than anything. Now, about 15 years ago, everything changed. Developers came in, bought up the neighboring land, and turned it into one of those picture-perfect communities, trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes, and of course, an HOA. They named it Silver Creek Estates, which honestly sounded fancier than anything within 10 miles of it. And for the most part, we stayed out of each other's way. They had their rules. I had my land simple. Well, mostly simple. See, the edge of their neighborhood ends in a cul-de-sac, a turnaround spot that all their residents used to get in and out, and that cul-de-sac backs right up near my property line. Close enough that over the years I'd occasionally see kids riding bikes near the edge or delivery vans cutting it a little tight, but nothing that ever caused a real issue. I never made a fuss about it, figured people make small mistakes, no harm done. And then there's my truck, an old work truck, nothing fancy, but it runs strong and gets the job done. I've parked it in the same spot on my gravel pad for as long as I can remember, same angle, same tire marks pressed into the ground, like muscle memory. Never once had a problem, until that afternoon. I remember it clear as day. It was a Thursday, hot as hell. I'd been out running errands most of the morning. I pulled into my driveway, already thinking about grabbing a cold drink and sitting down for a bit, and then I noticed something fell off. It took me a second to realize what it was. The space where my truck should have been was empty. At first I just stood there, keys still in my hand, staring at that patch of gravel like somehow the truck might just reappear if I blinked enough times. Then my brain started running through possibilities. Maybe I parked it somewhere else. Maybe I loaned it to someone and forgot. But deep down I knew that truck doesn't just vanish. I walked the property, checked around the shed, even looked down the dirt road like maybe someone had rolled it out there as a joke. Nothing. And that's when I felt it, that slow burn in your chest when something isn't just wrong. It's personal. So I called the non-emergency line, told them my truck was missing, gave them the details, the plate number, and the officer on the other end. He pauses for a second, then says, "Sir, it looks like your vehicle was towed earlier today." Towed. I actually laughed when he said it. Not because it was funny, but because it didn't make any sense. Towed by who? I asked, already feeling my jaw tighten. Private towing company, he said. Request came from Silver Creek Estates HOA. They reported an abandoned vehicle on community property. I didn't say anything for a few seconds, just stood there, staring out toward that cul-de-sac. And then I said, slow and steady, "That truck was on my land." The officer hesitated. "You might want to take that up with them, sir." "Oh, I plan to. But first, I had to get my truck back." The impound lot sat about 20 minutes out, one of those dusty places with a chain-link fence and rows of vehicles lined up like they'd all been forgotten. I walked into the office, told the guy behind the counter what I was there for. He barely looked at me, just slid a form across the desk and said, $380. $380. I repeated, just to hear it out loud. He nodded like it was nothing. I paid it, because what choice did I have? But every second standing there, signing those papers, handing over my card, felt like swallowing sand, dry, irritating, and hard to ignore. When they finally brought my truck around, I did a slow walk around it, checking for damage. There were a couple new scratches along the side, nothing major, but enough to tell me it hadn't been handled with care. I ran my hand over the metal, took a breath, and that's when the decision settled in, quiet. solid, unshakable. They picked the wrong person to mess with. I drove straight home, parked the truck right back in its spot on the gravel pad, same as always, then went inside, grabbed a folder I hadn't opened in years, documents my dad kept organized better than anyone I've ever known, property records, old surveys, maps, everything. If they wanted to claim that was their land, I was going to make damn sure I knew exactly where my land began and where theirs ended. That night, I didn't turn on the TV, didn't make dinner, didn't even sit down. I spread those papers out across the kitchen table and started going through them one by one, dates, measurements, boundary lines, all of it. And the more I looked, the more something didn't sit right. Because if there's one thing my dad was always careful about, it was land boundaries. And if something didn't add up, there was only one way to be sure. I needed a fresh survey, not some old map pulled from a dusty file. I needed someone out there, boots on the ground, measuring every inch like it actually mattered, because now it did. The next morning, I made a call to a licensed surveyor named Carl Benton. Guy had a reputation for being thorough to the point of obsession, which was exactly what I needed. I told him the situation, kept it simple. I think someone's crossed a line they shouldn't have. He chuckled a little on the phone, said he'd come out the next day. And as I hung up, I looked out the window toward that quiet little cul-de-sac. Neat, clean, perfectly planned. And for the first time, I started to wonder, what if it wasn't as perfect as they thought? Carl showed up right on time the next morning. Old pickup, faded blue, the kind of truck that's seen more dirt roads than highways. He stepped out slow, stretched his back like a man who's been doing this too long to rush anything, and gave me a nod that said he already understood the situation better than I'd explained over the phone. "Morning," he said, glancing past me toward the tree line and the edge where my land meets that polished HOA world. "Let's see what we've got." I walked him out to the gravel pad first, showed him exactly where the truck had been sitting, same place it had sat for years. He didn't say much, just took a few notes, then pulled out his equipment, tripod, measuring tools, markers, all precise, all methodical, the kind of work that doesn't leave room for opinion, only fact. And that's what I wanted, facts. We spent most of the morning walking the perimeter, stepping through patches of dry grass, around the old fence posts my dad put in decades ago. Carl would stop every so often, check his readings, adjust, then move again, slow and steady, like he was piecing together something invisible. At one point, we got close to the back edge, the part that runs along the HOA's cul-de-sac. You could hear it before you saw it. Tires rolling over smooth pavement, a car door shutting, someone's dog barking in the distance, a different world just a few yards away. Carl paused there longer than anywhere else. He leaned down, checked a marker, then stood up and looked out toward the cul-de-sac, squinting slightly like something wasn't lining up in his head. I noticed it right away, that subtle shift, the moment when a professional starts questioning what they're seeing. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately, just walked a few steps forward, then back again, double-checking his measurements. Then he let out a low whistle, not loud, just enough to tell me something wasn't right. "Well," he said, dragging the word out a little, "this is interesting." That's never a neutral word in situations like this. "Interesting how?" I asked, already feeling that same slow burn creeping back into my chest. Carl turned the screen of his device toward me, tapped a few points, lines, numbers, boundaries. It didn't mean much to me at first glance, but the way he looked at it told me everything. "They're pavement," he said, nodding toward the cul-de-sac. "It's not where it's supposed to be." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He pointed, traced an invisible line in the air. "Your property line runs right about here. Give or take an inch or two." Then he stepped forward, onto the edge of the asphalt. "But this is about 11 feet past that line." I just stood there for a second, letting that sink in. 11 feet. Not inches, not a small overlap you could shrug off. 11 feet of solid pavement, built, used, and maintained like it belonged there. "Are you sure?" I asked, not because I doubted him, but because I needed to hear him say it again. Carl gave a small, almost amused smile, the kind you get when the answer is obvious. "I don't do guesses," he said. "This cul-de-sac, it's sitting on your land." And just like that, everything shifted. All those years of seeing cars turn around out there, school buses pulling in and looping back out, delivery vans, moving trucks, neighbors backing out of their driveways, all of it, every single bit of that movement had been happening on my property for 15 years, without anyone noticing, without anyone asking, without anyone thinking twice. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I started to laugh, not loud, not out of joy, but that kind of quiet disbelief when something is so backwards it almost feels like a joke. They towed my truck, I said, shaking my head slightly, for being on their land. Carl didn't say anything, but the look on his face said he understood exactly what that meant. We finished the survey that afternoon, every line confirmed, every measurement locked in. Carl promised to have the official documentation ready within a couple of days, stamped, certified, the kind of paperwork that doesn't leave room for argument. And once I had that, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Now here's the thing. I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for a fight. I've lived next to that neighborhood for years without causing trouble. Never filed a complaint, never called anyone out, never made an issue over the little things. But this wasn't little. They didn't just make a mistake. They took something that wasn't theirs, and when they thought it was theirs, they acted on it. Cost me money, time, and a whole lot of unnecessary frustration. So no, I wasn't going to let it slide. 2 days later, Carl handed me the final survey, clean, clear, undeniable. I looked it over once, then again. Every line exactly where he said it would be, that 11-foot strip cutting straight through the edge of their precious cul-de-sac like a crack in glass. I made a couple calls that same afternoon. One to the county office, just to make sure everything was properly recorded, and another to a local attorney, a woman named Denise Harper, sharp, direct, didn't waste words. I told her what happened, sent over the documents, and within an hour, she called me back. "You've got a very strong position here," she said, calm but firm. "They're in clear encroachment, and based on what you've told me about the towing, that complicates things for them even more." "Good," I said simply. We filed a formal trespass complaint the next day. No drama, no big announcement, just paperwork, submitted the right way, the kind of move that doesn't make noise at first, but carries weight. And then, I took the next step. I hired a contractor to install concrete bollards, heavy-duty, waist-high posts, spaced evenly along my exact property line. Not an inch over, not an inch under. Exactly where the survey said my land ended. The crew came out early, just after sunrise, machines humming, drills cutting into the ground. It took most of the day, but by the time they were done, those bollards stood there like a row of silent sentinels, clean, solid, immovable. And just like that perfect little cul-de-sac wasn't so perfect anymore. The next morning, I didn't have to check. I could hear it. Engines revving, tires stopping and starting, the confused shuffle of cars that suddenly didn't have enough space to turn around, voices carrying across the distance, frustration, confusion, a few horns, not constant, just enough to tell you something had gone very wrong. I stepped outside with my coffee, walked over to the edge of my property, and watched. One car pulled in, slowed down, then stopped. The driver hesitated, probably expecting the usual open space to swing around. But instead, there were my bollards, cutting off that extra 11 feet they'd been relying on for years. He tried to turn anyway, backed up, pulled forward again, adjusted, then finally gave up and started reversing, slowly, awkwardly, all the way back down that narrow stretch of road. Behind him, another car waited, and another. It didn't take long before the whole system started to break down. By mid-morning, I saw a delivery van pull in, one of those big ones. The driver stepped out, looked around, scratched his head, then got back in and tried to maneuver. 10-point turn, maybe more, until he finally backed out, inch by inch. And I'll admit, standing there, watching all of it unfold, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not even satisfaction, exactly. More like balance, like something that had been tilted for years had finally been set straight. Of course, it didn't take long for it to reach the people in charge. That same afternoon, just as the sun was starting to dip a little lower, I heard footsteps coming up my driveway. Quick, deliberate, the kind that aren't there for a friendly visit. I turned, and there she was. Marilyn Cross, president of the Silver Creek HOA. Mid-50s, always dressed like she had somewhere important to be, posture stiff, expression sharper than it needed to be. I'd seen her around before, usually at a distance, clipboard in hand, talking to residents like she was running a small country. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just walked straight up to my porch and knocked. Once, twice, then again, louder. I took my time getting to the door, opened it just enough to see her clearly. "Can I help you?" I asked, calm, neutral. Her eyes flicked past me, then back. "You need to remove those posts immediately," she said. No greeting, no introduction, just straight to it. I leaned against the doorframe slightly. "What post?" Her jaw tightened. "The concrete barriers you installed this morning, they're blocking our roadway." I let a small pause hang in the air, just long enough, then said, "That's not your roadway." And for the first time since she walked up, she hesitated. "Excuse me," she said. I opened the door a little wider, reached behind me, and grabbed the survey documents sitting on the table, held them out just enough for her to see the official stamps. "That section of pavement," I said, pointing toward the cul-de-sac, "is 11 feet onto my property." She stared at the papers, didn't take them, didn't speak, just stared. And right there, I could see it. That moment when certainty starts to crack. Marilyn didn't reach for the papers right away. She just stood there, eyes locked on that seal like if she stared hard enough it might disappear. Then finally, slowly, she took them from my hand, flipping through each page a little too quickly, like she was hoping to find something. Anything. That didn't line up, but there was nothing to find. It was clean, precise, undeniable. This has to be wrong," she said, though her voice had already lost some of that sharp edge it had when she first showed up. I shook my head, calm. "It's been verified twice, once by the county records, once by a licensed surveyor. You're welcome to hire your own if you want a third opinion." She didn't respond to that, just kept flipping through the pages, slower now, more careful, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. 15 years of assumptions, of control, of being the one who enforced the rules, suddenly standing on something that wasn't hers. "You're disrupting access for 42 homes," she said finally, looking up at me, trying to regain some ground. "This needs to be resolved immediately." I gave a small nod. I agree. That caught her off guard. For a second, she thought I was about to back down. You could see it in the way her shoulders shifted, just slightly, like she was stepping back into familiar territory. Then I continued. "There are 2 ways to fix it," I said, keeping my voice even. "You can remove the encroachment and reroute your cul-de-sac entirely. Or you can purchase the portion of land it sits on." And just like that, the ground shifted again. Her expression tightened, not anger this time, something closer to realization. "You're asking us to buy land we've been using for years," she said. "I'm asking you to buy land you don't own," I replied. That landed hard. She closed the folder slowly, handed it back to me. And for the first time since this started, she didn't have an immediate response, just a quiet nod, like she understood this wasn't something she could talk her way out of. "Our attorney will be in touch," she said, turning to leave. "I'm sure they will," I answered. And that was that, at least for that moment. But the neighborhood, that was a different story. Because over the next few days, things got messy. Real messy. It started small. Just longer wait times getting in and out. People having to reverse down that narrow stretch because there wasn't enough room to turn around anymore. Awkward at first, inconvenient, but manageable. Then came the close calls. I watched one morning as 2 neighbors tried to back out at the same time. Neither one wanting to give up ground. Mirrors got a little too close. Tires scraped the curb. Voices raised just enough to carry across the distance. Nothing serious, yet. But it didn't stop there. By the end of the first week, there were 2 minor fender benders, nothing major, just enough to shake people up, insurance calls, frustrated conversations on sidewalks, that low-level tension that builds when something disrupts a routine people never thought twice about. And then came the fire truck. That changed everything. It was part of some scheduled safety drill, nothing urgent, but when that truck pulled into the cul-de-sac and tried to make the turn, it couldn't. Too tight. Not enough space. They tried adjusting, inching forward, backing up, repositioning. But those bollards weren't moving, and without that extra 11 feet, the maneuver just wasn't possible. The truck ended up stuck there for a good 20 minutes, blocking the entire road, residents standing outside, watching, some confused, some irritated, and a few starting to connect the dots. That's when the pressure really hit the HOA. Because inconvenience is one thing, but safety concerns, that's different. About 3 weeks after everything started, I got the call. Denise rang me late afternoon, her tone steady, but there was a hint of something underneath it. "They're ready to talk seriously," she said. I leaned back in my chair, not surprised, just waiting. We set up a meeting for the next day. Neutral location, conference room, long table, the kind of setting where everyone pretends this is just business, even when it's not. Marilyn was there, along with 2 other board members and their attorney. A younger guy, sharp suit, careful eyes, the kind who measures every word before he lets it out. Denise sat beside me, calm as ever. Folder already open, documents neatly arranged. She gave me a small nod that said everything was exactly where it needed to be. They started with the usual acknowledgments, formalities, a carefully worded explanation about unintentional encroachment and historical oversight. All the phrases that sound official but don't really change anything. Then came the offer. $40,000, their attorney said, sliding a paper across the table. For the disputed strip of land. I didn't even look at it. Just leaned back slightly, folded my arms, and let a small silence settle in the room. Then I said, simple as that. No. No explanation. No counter right away. Just no. You could feel the shift immediately, that subtle tightening in the room, like everyone realized this wasn't going to be a quick resolution. Their attorney cleared his throat slightly. "We believe that's a fair valuation given the size and..." "It's not about size." I cut in, still calm. "It's about impact." That got his attention. I leaned forward just enough, met his eyes, then glanced briefly at Marilyn. "That strip of land isn't just dirt. It's the only functional turnaround for your entire neighborhood. Without it, your road doesn't work the way it was designed to." Silence again, this time heavier. Denise slid a document forward, my number, printed clean and clear. $285,000. Their reaction was immediate. One of the board members actually let out a short laugh, like it had to be a joke. "That's outrageous," he said. I shrugged slightly. "So is towing someone's vehicle off their own property." That one landed exactly where it needed to. The room went quiet again, but different this time. Not disbelief, more like recalculation. We went back and forth for a while. They pushed, tried to justify a lower number, brought up cost of redesigning the road, tried to frame it as a shared inconvenience. But every angle led back to the same reality. They needed that land more than I did. Eventually, we adjourned without an agreement. And then, they went back to living with the problem. Another week passed. Then another. More complaints, more awkward maneuvers, more frustration building inside that neat little neighborhood that was never designed to function without that extra space. And then, finally, they came back. Full offer. $285,000, plus reimbursement for the towing fee, plus $12,000 to cover legal costs. No negotiation this time. No argument. Just acceptance. We signed the paperwork a few days later. Clean, official, done. The bollards came down not long after. Construction crews moved in, adjusted the layout, made everything whole again. And just like that, the cul-de-sac went back to being what it always looked like. Normal. But here's the thing about normal. It doesn't feel the same once you know what's underneath it. These days, I still park my truck in the same spot on that gravel pad, same angle, same tire marks pressed into the ground. Nothing about that has changed. What has changed is the silence. No notes. No complaints. No one calling in favors or making assumptions about where my land begins or ends. Every now and then, I'll see Marilyn drive by slower than before, eyes forward, hands tight on the wheel, like she's making sure not to drift even an inch too far. And me? I just sip my coffee, watch the morning roll in, and let that quiet sit exactly where it belongs. Because sometimes, it's not about getting even. It's about making sure people remember where the line is. Now here's the part one keep thinking about, and I'm curious what you'd do if you were in my place. Was that justice, or did I take it too far? Because yeah, they were wrong. No question about that. But once you realize you've got leverage like that, where do you draw your own line? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA that forgot who actually owns the land, I want to hear that too. And if you want more stories like this, real situations, real consequences, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around, because trust me, this kind of thing happens more often than people think.